Welcome to the Sharing the Truth podcast. The speakers for this episode are Austin Grignon, Holly Gardner, and Robert Liebeck. I'm Michael Gardner, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Sharing the Truth is sponsored by the Waterford Riverside Seventh-day Adventist Church in Waterford, Michigan, and our hope is to help provide light where there is darkness by helping point people to the truth about our Savior, Jesus Christ, and His second coming. Today, we're going to be discussing part one of the topic of grace and loving kindness. Whether this is a topic or question you have pondered or struggled to understand yourself, or you simply want to help someone else understand these concepts better, we hope to help you handle either situation successfully. If you happen to have questions or comments for our speakers, please leave your comments on this video, and the speakers will do their best to respond. So, Austin, what is grace and what is loving kindness?
When I think about grace and loving kindness, grace, we all hear the common phrase, grace is unmerited favor, or it's unearned favor. And when I think about that, the easiest thing that comes to my mind is I have been given something that I don't deserve. But I have to say that grace to me goes hand in hand with mercy, and mercy is not receiving something that you do deserve, which is often a negative. I haven't received something that I do deserve. I believe that the most perfect example of being shown or given grace is using grace to give mercy, which is essentially being completely absolved of the punishments that I do deserve. And that's just kind of like the 1,000-foot outlook of, what is grace from God's standpoint to me. Now, loving kindness is the reason behind all of the actions that God takes for us. So when I think about grace, when I think about mercy, when I think about any action that God takes for us, it has to be because of His loving kindness. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not destroyed. We are not consumed. His compassion is unending, and it is never failing us. And the word for that in the original Greek is the true example of God's love that you may or may not have heard. It's agape love, which is the unconditional love, meaning there's nothing that you can do to earn this love. There is nothing that you can do to lose this love. It is this existential part of who God is. And that right there is what I think when God says, emulate me, be like me, become changed like I am, that loving kindness right there is the one thing that He wants us to look at, because everything else flows from there. When we say, what is love? We say that God is love. It is maybe the only phrase that we need to know for the entire history of the universe, past and present. It is an immutable fact of who God is, but also an immutable fact of the laws of nature, that God is love. And so this loving kindness that God has, this enduring favor towards us, is that every single opportunity that He has to give us something that will benefit us, He is going to take. Now, whether that's giving us something good that will help us, or allowing us to receive the consequences of something that will then temper us into something better, God has this massive, massive point of view where He knows the end from the beginning, and that loving kindness is more than just, I'm going to treat you good, but rather I am going to do right by you. And oftentimes the separation that I think of between just loving kindness and grace is that the loving kindness that leads to grace, it didn't have to. But the strength of that love led Him to giving us something that there was no possible way that we could have earned. So we received that gift from Him because He loved us so much, even though not only is there no way that we could have done it on our own, but, imagine if we took it on as a debt. there's no way that we can pay that debt back either. Think about it like buying a house or buying a car. Some people can buy a car or a house in cash. Some people have to take out loans, but no matter what, the bank gets their money in the end. Yep. In this situation right here, there is absolutely nothing that we can do on the back end or on the front end to make the payment for what we have been given, which is we were given the life of the Son of the universe. Because he gave that up for us, that is the grace that we received through his loving kindness.
Holly, you have something to add?
Well, I'm just curious, if there is that much grace, then how did we end up with the devil? There was grace extended to him, yes, and he chose not to partake of it.
Yeah. When I think about the unearned favor that Satan received, the grace that Satan received, it was essentially just the allowance or the free will to act upon his conclusions that he had, falsely drawn or he had, mistakenly come to. And it's a sad reality that we live in, that he chose to take that free will. And even though at this point in the controversy that we live in, he knows he's wrong, but he has still taken the grace that he has continually showed and decided to use it for the ultimate evil, which is the end of as many of God's children as possible.
Yeah. And that brings up, which it's freely given, not on the merit like we talked about. The gift of God is given to all of us, no matter for sinners right now or sinners in the past. This applies to God's grace towards saving all of us. And it's a free gift, like the grace we still can't believe is God's grace by sending his son to take away our sins is just still unbelievable to me. That's a true gift of grace that God gave us. And he just reveals it through everything that he does in this world for us.
So I want to reiterate a couple of things that have already kind of been over, but so in terms of grace isn't really the same thing as loving kindness in that they're closely related, but they're not exactly the same. Grace is the unmerited favor or a gift freely given, as Austin pointed out. It's not earned, and it's certainly not deserved. Loving kindness is God's loyal, covenantal love, his steadfast mercy and faithfulness towards his people. So to quote Jeremiah 31:3, "The Lord hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness I have drawn thee." And then as far as relationships go, grace is how God's loving kindness is expressed. And loving kindness includes grace, mercy, patience, and compassion. It is broader in emotion and relationship. And then grace is more about gifting. Loving kindness is about relational loyalty. So, Bob, from your perspective, how do you view grace and loving kindness as being the same thing? And if not, how are they different?
Well, grace and loving kindness are relatively concepts in the Bible, but they are not exactly the same. And here's how it works together. Grace could be seen as the way God expresses his unendless loving kindness to us. Mm-hmm. Loving kindness is a character of God that motivates the acts of his grace. So if we think of it this way, loving kindness is God's heart, and grace is the hand that God reaches out for us. Grace is a gift. Loving kindness is a character of that trait. Both reveal the depths of God's love, but in a slightly different angle. One shows that he gives, the other shows who he is. Mm-hmm. And I got this one text here, Ephesians 2:8. By the grace you have been saved through faith, and that all of yourself is a gift of God. So in simple terms, grace is God saying, I will give you what you don't deserve. Loving kindness is God saying, I'll never stop loving you no matter what.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that you kind of went deeper into the idea that I floated over right there. The thing that popped into my mind when I was thinking about what you were saying is that, with loving kindness being the heart of God and grace being the hand, the actions, or the representation of how he manifests that loving kindness, you cannot have the ultimate loving kindness without its expression in grace, and grace has nowhere to come from without the ultimate loving kindness that exists to push it forward. And that really is how we know just how good our God is that we see the actions and the results of both.
And I think as Christians mature in their pathway through life, they are able to capture some of that and extend it to other people, and thereby extending an invitation to join in fellowship.
Yeah, that sounds exactly a little bit of an overlap to something that Michael had mentioned when he was recapping that last little bit, where you talked about a few of the characteristics. You said like patience, the long suffering, the loving kindness, the grace, and it sort of overlapped really well with the fruits of the Spirit, which, when we talk about the fruits of the Spirit, really what that is, the fruit being the result of the Spirit in us. And so, Holly, like you had mentioned, us receiving grace, being changed towards God's loving kindness, it then pushes us to then extend out with our own versions of grace and mercy. And then you go through the fruits of the Spirit, love and joy, peace, patience, and every single characteristic that God has, we can be changed into that through the loving kindness that we see from him.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, like I said, that's something we can't earn. That's something that we receive through God's grace. And that's what some people just don't understand is it's nothing we can't earn grace. We have to accept it.
So, Holly, I would imagine the having loving kindness, and we're supposed to express that to others. Can that sometimes make you a doormat?
I think you can appear that way, but no, not really.
Why not?
No, because I've had experiences where I've extended grace to other people. And no, I didn't feel that at all. I think you support that person and their dignity in the process. It's not something that's harmful to them. This is love expressed through action.
I try to kind of break that down too. Is like showing grace means forgiving when someone doesn't deserve it, being kind to someone who has wronged you, giving them another chance, not re-rationalize the problem that you had with them. Now, the other side of it, the doormat is someone who would allow themselves to be used or abused or walked over. That's someone who doesn't set boundaries and avoids confrontations out of fear. So it's a kind of a two-part. You can be a doormat, but that's not.
And we have to be careful, I believe.
Right.
There are people out there that are looking for someone who does express loving kindness and does express grace to people, and they see that as a weakness. And it's not a weakness, but you're going to have those that try to take advantage of that. And we just have to be aware.
Yeah, be cautious of really essentially where do we draw the line of you are accepting my grace versus you are, stepping on the boundaries of my grace. And the thing that I think about is a lot of people don't see grace and patience and mercy as masculine traits. But I think when I think about Jesus, the most masculine man that's ever walked this earth is Jesus Christ. And that, to me, is for one reason. and that is he had the power to do the most damage, inflict the worst revenge, and to gain the most power from us here on this world. He had all of that authority within his grasp, and throughout his entire time being ridiculed, persecuted, beaten, and insulted, and had every single wicked thing happen to him, he still extended the grace that came from his loving kindness, that came from his Father. And that right there is the ultimate form of strength, is allowing others to make the choices, even though you could say just punish them for it, but you're allowing them to live their life, and all you're doing is inviting them into a better life, which is what Jesus did.
Yeah.
He didn't let people walk all over him, but he let people make their choices and then suffer the consequences
Yeah,
of that. And that was the
exactly.
masculine patience that he had.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the way he was when he was hanging on the cross, and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That was his grace being poured out, even
Yes.
as he died.
Yeah. So, switching gears here for a minute. So, Austin, this is going to be a kind of a two-parter question, but can you think back to a time when you wished you had shown grace and did not? And what can be the potential aftermath from being in a position to show grace and not showing it?
Ooh, so I think, let me answer that second question first. What can be the potential aftermath of having not shown grace? And, when I think about the situations that I've been in, the number one thing that comes to my mind is, well, I feel like a bad person, mostly because I am, but now I just feel like it instead of just ignoring it. And that's because I see the example that Christ set for me, and boom, perfect example right in front of my face where I fall short. And it doesn't feel good. And I also know that in this situation, I lose trust in the person before me, because grace coming from a Christian should be seen as an automatic. Even though we are fallen and flawed individuals, in order to emulate Christ, we have to extend his grace from us to others. And so when I don't show grace to others, it really feels, especially internally, if not explicitly said, but it really feels like I have lost these people's trust, and I no longer represent Christ in a, not even a positive way, but just in any way whatsoever. The examples, I'm not going to, maybe get into too much detail, but there have been times where when I was coaching, I coached high school basketball for several years, and it's high schoolers. You got young teenage boys, and they rarely do everything that they're told when they're told how they're told to do it. If you've ever been a parent of any teenager, but teenage boys, especially in a group together, they're not good at doing what they're told very often.
Yeah.
And so here I am trying to instruct them in something that I know, and I know they don't know it. And so here I'm in a small example of a situation that God is with us, where he is clearly smarter than us, and he knows more about our situation than us. And he's trying to educate us, but we can just, I think I'm going to do it my own way. We can say that to God. Not really a great plan.
No.
And so when these young individuals had done that to me, very oftentimes I had extended patience and extended grace and extended mercy, but every so often I would, through a bit of my own self coming out, I would insult the style of choices that they had made, or I would choose to, kind of react in anger to the responses that I had been, given. And although in the moment it had elicited the reaction that I was hoping for, which was, maybe I'm not doing what coach wants me to, which is what I was looking for, it didn't produce the long-term effect of something that anybody would hope for, which is a more beneficial relationship built out of mutual love and respect for each other.
Holly?
I think back to times when I haven't extended grace, and it still pains me to think of it because I wasn't extending God's love in those moments. I was just thinking of self.
And I got a little similar story to Austin because I coached girls softball for about 10 years. And the very first year, I flat out told the girls, it's going to be a little different. And I knew I was going to get some flack from the parents. But I just kind of sat back and like I said, keep the grace going. I said, Lord, this is how we're going to try it. And after the year started going halfway through the year, then parents started coming and say, we see what you're doing. You're giving the girls a fair shot. Because most time in any type of sports, it's, here's a pitcher, here's the first baseman, here's the catcher. They're your star players, and that's where they play those positions. But I told the team right off the bat is, we're going to show you guys the whole aspect. You're going to play every position in the field by the end of the year. And like I said, at the end of the year, the parents captain said, we appreciate what you did because you didn't specify one person. The star player plays here, and here we rotate, so it was a fair for everybody. So it's kind of showing grace in a sports aspect. The other thing I was going to say is this reminds me of the parable of the unforgiven servant in Matthew 18:21-35. If you have never read it, go there and read it. I recommend you should read it. Mm-hmm. I gave a brief outline of what the story is, and what this is a king and his servant owed the king. I forgot how many denarios it was. I think I wrote it down here, but so many denarios. And back in there, and that was a lot of money, 10,000 denarios. Tight. What do they call that? Mm-hmm. Not denarios. Talents. Yeah, 10,000 talents this servant owed him. So the king says, pay me or you're going to be thrown into jail. So the servant got down on his knees. He begged and said, please, give me a chance. I will repay you everything. And the king gave compassion to that servant and freed him of all the talents and let him go. The same servant went out and went to a fellow man that only owed him 1 denarius and said, pay me or else I'm going to get you locked up in jail. So after the king heard of what happened, he just says, you unfaithful servant, I forgave you of all your sins and all your money, and you did this to your fellow guy? Lock him up. So what that shows is that's just like God's grace. He gives us the grace, but we have to also show grace to our fellow man. Mm-hmm. And what I want to say, the last thing is that a talent back then was 6,000 denarius. In today's society, one talent is $6 billion. 1 denario is 600,000. So wow. You can see the big difference of what the servant was trying to get from what he owed.
Yeah. So I'm gonna hit you back again, Bob, though. Can you remember a time when someone showed you grace?
Well, I was trying to think of that, ponder over it, and it's hard to put sometimes to remember back somebody that has given you grace. But I've kind of looked at it kind of a little bit this way: is when I was younger and not a Christian, I was kind of a rebel. And what I mean was I got mixed up with the wrong type of kids in high school. And I remember this one case where a friend of mine, we had just gotten our own cars, and we didn't have money for gas and stuff, so we would sneak around the town at the middle of the night, take our gas cans, siphon hose, and go and siphon gas out of people's cars, And one time, we almost got caught, and the police officer, who's out there? And luckily we got away. But the very next day, the police officer that was out there that day is also our football coach. Oh, no. And he came up to me after practice, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I forgave you this time," and he walked away.
Whoa.
So that's kind of like my grace story. There is, I never did it again, but.
So you did the opposite of what the servant did. Is you did not waste that opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Holly, what about you?
Oh, yeah. In boarding school, definitely. Yeah.
So you had a lot of times someone showed you grace?
Yeah. More than one person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I had a real knack at getting into trouble.
Well, if I can speak more recently for me, it would be pretty much daily. Holly shows grace to me every single day. So,
What a husband.
Austin.
When I think about the story of the unforgiving servant and the examples of grace that we receive, we know what we can do then in almost like a pay it forward type of system where somebody does something good for me and I want to do something good for somebody else. And that is just the most bare bones example of God's love spreading through us. On the deeper level, from the more theological perspective, when you take a look at that parable, God showed us so much grace when he forgave us of the debt that we owed. We essentially had a debt that was worth the life of the Son of the universe, and it was paid off for us. So how ridiculous is it if we cannot then extend grace to others, our fellow man, people who we are on equal footing with? How silly is it if we cannot extend grace to them in every situation where loving kindness would demand it?
Yeah, he showed grace to the whole world. We're just asked to show grace to just our friends or family or someone that's hurting,
A lot of people think that, they could take some, high road. Oh, I could forgive my enemies. And a lot of people think that it's, it'd be super easy to show grace to, people that you don't know that minorly inconvenience you. But for Jesus, he wasn't betrayed by Babylonians, and he wasn't betrayed by Syrians, people who were enemies of the Jewish people. He was betrayed by the people who he called 1,000 years before and said, "Follow me and I will make you a great nation." He was betrayed by the people that said, "You shall be my children and I shall be your God." He was betrayed by the people who he led through the wilderness for 40 years, the people that he pushed through the Red Sea. He was betrayed by those people. And yet, despite it all, like Holly said, up on the cross, he still said, "Father, they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing. No matter what, please forgive them." Now, like Bob had said earlier, the only action that we can take as far as earning this gift is simply opening out our hands and accepting it. That's all we can do, is accept that forgiveness. And even though we are God's children and he has called us, we can still betray him, and he has given us the grace and the mercy to say, "I will allow you back in." And that is what we really want to push back forward to others.
Well, look at the story of Jonah and going to Nineveh and not really wanting to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to extend grace to them, loving kindness. He said, "Destroy them." And he fully expected that to happen because they were such an evil group of people. But then he did like God told him to do, to preach to them, to warn them, and they turned things around. Jonah still wasn't happy. He goes out of town, and he's under this plant that grew up to shade him, and he's happy, and then the plant withers away. And then that's God's opportunity to set things straight with Jonah about these people being worth more than the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, Holly, in 2 Corinthians 12, chapter 12, verse 9, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. What does that mean? And are there other verses similar to that in the Bible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God's grace sustains and strengthens us in our weakness. Romans 5:20, but where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. And Titus 2:11, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. And Bob already mentioned Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace have you been saved through faith. Mm-hmm. And this not of your own doing. It was a gift from God, lest anyone should boast.
And I kind of broke down the actual question, so I broke it down to, my grace is sufficient for thee. God's telling Paul here, you don't need me to remove the hardship right now. I'm giving you the strength and the persistence to help you to endure it. And as we go through life, we're going to have the same ups and downs, and we just need to remember God is there for us. And the second part, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. When we are weak, we depend more deeply on God. God's power shines most clearly when we can't rely on our own strength. Simply put, you may feel weak, broken, lost, or overwhelmed, but I'm strength enough for you. My power will carry you, not your own power.
I love this last verse. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. You know, like Holly had said, with us being shown, grace in the situations where, we have intentionally done something that should have gotten us into trouble, God has said, listen, you don't need to pay the result of it. Just listen, you are covered in grace. And you mentioned the verse where it says, where sin abounds, grace abounds that much more. And that right there shows the strength of God, which is there is nothing that you can do to separate me from your love as long as you are, or to separate you, from God's love, as long as you are accepting of God's love. God is always sitting there extending it, and there's nothing that you can do to push it away from you. There's only your complete and utter resistance to it will stop you from receiving it, because God will still stand there holding it out. So whenever you want to accept it, that is where his arm is eternally long. So no matter how far you've gone, all you have to do is turn around and grab his hand. And that is what God means when he says, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Because no matter how far you fall, his arm is long enough and it is strong enough to pull us up out of that.
Well said. Anybody have anything more they want to add?
Lamentations 3:22-23. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassion fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness.
I think that's a good place to wrap things. And so that's going to wrap up today's discussion. In closing, we hope that today's discussion covering part 1 of our topic has helped you understand more about grace and loving kindness. We do hope that you have found this discussion to be enlightening and informative. If you have questions or comments, please leave a comment on this video and we'll do our best to address it. If you have ideas for future topics, please feel free to contact us using the link in the description on this video. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to bringing you our next discussion.